This video is brought to you by Incogni. In recent weeks, a few separate incidents have shown that the UK's military isn't quite up to the standards most of us wish it were. The first incident occurred when the HMS Prince of Wales failed to set sail for a NATO exercise, as the result of a mechanical failure. The thing is, the HMS Prince of Wales was actually only meant to join the NATO exercises as a stand-in for the HMS Queen Elizabeth, which also had to cancel at the last minute due to an issue being found with a coupling on the propeller shaft. To make matters worse, only a few weeks later, the UK's latest nuclear missile test failed. The Trident missile crashed into the sea near the submarine that fired it. In fact, the last Trident test, which took place 8 years ago in 2016, also failed. And, well, these incidents happened against the backdrop of General Sir Patrick Sanders suggesting that, if NATO goes to war with Russia in the future, the UK would need to form a civilian army, because the UK armed forces simply aren't big enough. These situations then only serve to highlight the criticisms of the British military at the moment. So in this video, we're going to have a look more into the UK's military crisis. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. Now, there are broadly two main reasons the UK military is in crisis: a lack of investment and a recruitment crisis. Let's have a look at each of these in turn. On the surface, it looks as though the UK actually isn't doing all that bad in terms of investment. It's in the upper half of NATO members when it comes to defence spending, with the UK committing 2.07% of its GDP to defence in 2023. This remains above the NATO guideline of 2%. Moreover, while some other comparable European countries like France and Germany have dipped below this 2% guideline, the UK has not yet actually dropped below it. The same is true when we look at the UK's equipment expenditure as a proportion of GDP. It comes roughly middle of the pack among NATO allies in this regard, with the UK spending about 28.6% of its defence spending on equipment, far above the 20% NATO guideline. The point is, on the surface, everything looks healthy. However, when we actually dig down into the numbers, it becomes clear that the UK military just isn't getting the funding it needs. Part of the problem is down to the sheer amount of attention that the UK pays to its nuclear deterrent, so much so that other elements of the military gets left behind. As things stand, the nuclear deterrent is expected to account for 34% of the whole equipment budget until 2033. Now, even this is likely to be an underestimate though, as a report by the National Audit Office, or NAO, has suggested that the most recent defence equipment plan was unaffordable, and that the plan would actually cost about £17 billion more than has been budgeted for. The main reason for this is that the costs of the new Dreadnought ballistic missile submarines and the new nuclear warhead has gone up by 62% since the NAO's previous report. Now, we won't get into an argument about the merits of a nuclear deterrent. Everyone will have their own views on that. However, it is true to say that the whole point of having it is so that it'll never be used. And if the Defence Secretary is correct when he says that we're now in a pre-war world, and if NATO was to go to war with Russia at some point in the future, then assuming the nuclear taboo holds, it won't be fought with nuclear weapons. Conventional forces are still required. And, well, if we exclude the costs of the nuclear deterrent, Britain actually spends only about 1.75% on defence, below the 2% NATO recommendation, and below France. And even beside this, the UK has been spending less and less on its military over time. Back in 1956-57, the UK was spending nearly 7% of its GDP on defence. This steadily declined over the next half-century or so, to the roughly 2% we're familiar with today. Now, the big decline that we see at the end of the graph is a result of the 2010 Defence Review, which was designed to address a £35 billion black hole in the defence budget. Cuts had to be made, and the entire Harrier aircraft fleet was taken out of service years before their replacements were ready. In fact, this is something that has been happening this year too, with the Navy announcing that the HMS Westminster and the HMS Argyle are going to be decommissioned before their replacements are ready. However, this isn't so much to do with funding and more to do with the availability of sailors. So with this in mind, let's move on to the military's recruitment crisis. As things stand, there are just shy of 140,000 members of the regular armed forces in the UK. This is broken down to about 32,000 Royal Navy or Royal Marines, 75,000 members of the Army, and about 31,000 members of the RAF. However, all of these groups saw a decline from 2022, with the decline across all groups sitting at just under 6,000 personnel. The decline too is mainly down to voluntary outflow, which is military speak for anyone who leaves the military before the end of their engagement or commission period. So why are more people leaving the military than joining it? Well, there are a few reasons. First, back in 2012, Capita was awarded the contract for army recruitment. Under Capita, there have been reports that it takes months to even meet a serving officer, let alone actually join the armed forces. Additionally, getting people to even want to join in the first place is proving difficult. Richard Mitchell, a former member of the Parachute Regiment, pointed out that part of the issue is that Iraq was exposed as the big lie, and Afghanistan as a complete failure. Young people look back on recent history and worry the same will happen again. This is only made worse when you consider the conditions in the military. Last year, the military had to apologise for the fact that about a third of its housing was in need of repair. There have also been a slew of sexual harassment scandals reported in the media in the last few years. These scandals have implicated the Red Arrows, submarine crews and civil servants working for the Ministry of Defence. These have likely all contributed to a decline in morale, with surveys showing that this has actually fallen by as much as a third. Now, the government has tried to solve the recruitment crisis, with the Ministry of Defence increasing pay by about 5% plus £1,000 in the last year, the largest increase over the last 20 years. However, if it thinks that this is enough to solve either problem, then it's likely mistaken. The House of Commons Defence Committee has said that unless the UK builds a thriving industrial base and an offer that can attract and sustain enough service personnel, the country will never achieve warfighting or strategic readiness. Clearly, the current state of the world is plagued by uncertainty and risk, and while you've been watching this video, your personal information might have been sold or published online without you even knowing it. Even whilst recording videos, we're interrupted by robocalls, and if you're wondering why you also might be getting random numbers calling your phone, well, the answer is the malevolent workings of shady forces called data brokers. These data brokers can collect and sell your personal information to anyone, from a company to an online criminal. This data can include your name and aliases, social security number, login credentials, home address, location, history, online activity, and much more. But even if you're not fussed about a call here and there, one day it could be a little call, but the next a huge loan could be taken out under your name. So if you want to protect your data, Incogni is here to help. Incogni reaches out to data brokers on your behalf, requests your personal data removal, and deals with any objections from their side. Since many data brokers continue collecting your personal information even after they've removed it, Incogni also takes care that your data stays off the market by conducting repeated removal requests. So create an account with our link in the description, grant Incogni the ability to work on your behalf, and sit back as they make you safer. Plus, by using our link, you'll get an exclusive 60% off an annual Incogni plan. Thanks for checking it out, and thanks to Incogni for supporting this video.